Introducing your host, Bradley.
Going, guys? Phantom Cave here with the latest episode of The Enthusiast. Today we're going to be talking about the latest news on the Phantom, some good old entertainment for this Sunday night, and we are joined by this week's guest, Julie Ditrich. Firstly, how are you, Julie?
I'm very good, thank you, Bradley. It's fantastic to be here. I want to say thank you for inviting me, and also a hello to all the fans out there who might be listening or viewing on Sunday.
So this week we finally received the latest Phantom comic that had been delayed over the last week or so. I think last week when I talked about the comic being delayed by 1 week, it didn't really fuss me for that much. It didn't even fuss me that much. But as I like to say, as my family says, you get that in the hard jobs. And the cover and the lettering for this week's comic, it is beautiful. I'm loving like the new take on the covers and the new sort of format they're going with the covers for this year. So I think with the new covers and the new sort of format on the covers that we've been seeing over, I think, the past month or so, it just looks beautiful, looks aesthetically appealing, and I reckon it brings the audience in. It brings a first time comic book buyer, or it brings basically a first time person who doesn't know about the comic, doesn't know about the character in. I think it's just a wonderful thing that Few has done, and I am guessing Glenn did that with the lettering because he's just an awesome bloke and he's just an awesome sort of person to do with the lettering sort of stuff. Coming up in today's episode, we have big updates on the new Hermes press books, a new Phantom podcast. We talked to Julie Ditrich about her new Phantom story, and we finally get a new update from the new publisher in Germany, which will be exciting. Like I think over the last year, we've obviously as fans, we've seen two new publishers coming on. So we will be talking about that and a whole lot more in this. Today we have big updates on the new Hermes press books. We have 2 books for immediate release this week. So I think with these books coming out, which are the Phantom Complete Dailies Volume 24 and DC's The Complete Phantom Volume 2 out now, I definitely, in the next couple of weeks or the next week or so, I definitely will be ordering the DC's The Complete Phantom Volume number 2, because I obviously, in my collection, I haven't actually got the original copies of the DC run of the Phantom that was, I think, done back in 1989 to, I think, the early 90s. So it's going to be interesting how and when people actually get hold of these new Hermes press books. And I find it interesting because I think one of the first Hermes press books that I actually got was a book that was done on the entire run of Don Newton. So yeah, it was, when I got that, it was very, very interesting how they presented the book, and it's always interesting how they present these type of books with these books coming out right now. Moving on, there's a new Phantom podcast. Yes, what? There is. Okay, so there's a new Phantom podcast. The fans can now experience a new podcast all about our favorite character. Now, the new Phantom podcast is done by Nova Podcasts, and the first episode will be out on the 15th of February, which will be awesome because, as a lot of fans know, I don't think there is that many places where fans can actually get content that is about the Phantom. I know I do I think I do quite a bit. I've obviously published, 400 videos on the Phantom. So it's quite pretty damn awesome that we're now getting a new limited series podcast, because in the last couple of days, I've actually been talking to the host on about different things. And now, next up, we will be asking a few questions to our guest, Julie Ditrich, about her new Phantom story. So, question number one, Julie, is how is the story coming along? And can you give the fans a brief rundown on who it is about?
The story has been completely written, and I will preempt it by saying it's 4 issues and it's 96 pages all up. So it's quite a long story. So to answer the question about how it's going along, at the moment it's with Wendell Cavalcanti, the artist, and he's finished penciling and inking the entire first issue. So there's 3 issues left to go. And the story concentrates on the Phantom himself. That's the major character.
Okay, so I know with this story, as I think we talked about it when I interviewed you, I think last year, and you were talking about that it's supposed to be about old 1930s or 1940s story consisting of, I think, the Golden Circle, something like that.
Yes, the story is actually called The Return of the Golden Circle.
Yeah.
And it's the sequel to a vintage Phantom story that appeared in the late 1930s called The Golden Circle. And the story was about the Phantom, who was on a train and was framed for murder by this all-woman criminal gang who are based in Paris, and they're called the Golden Circle. And one of the major popular characters from that gang of women was one called Fifi. Yeah. So Fifi was beloved by a lot of Phantom readers. So there is a minor appearance of her in this particular story as well. And essentially in the original story, he had to prove his innocence because he was a hunted man by both the gang as well as the police.
Yeah.
And found his way to... Yes, sorry?
I think in a lot of stories where we've seen what Lee Falk has created in his stories, a lot of the stories that he's created, there's a lot of the times the Phantom, he's either getting hunted down as a criminal or like a masked bandit or something. I think when a couple of years ago, I read the full unedited version of The Prisoner of the Himalayas or something, that story, which is one of the first Phantom stories that was getting published in the newspapers back in the mid to 1930s, I think.
Well, in that case, this fits the criteria of what you've just described.
Yeah.
Because essentially the original story, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers in case people haven't read it, but essentially
we don't really.
He makes his way to their hideout and then he's condemned to death. Okay. And it's really about how he escapes and how he seeks justice. So my story, which is called The Return of the Golden Circle, takes place 7 years later. And even though the original one it is vintage in its look and its setting, this one, even though it is 7 years later, it is given kind of a modern sensibility about it. So that kind of summarizes where we're going with this particular story.
Okay. The story itself sounds interesting. Now we're going to be getting into question number 2. Did you get any inspirations for the story when you were writing it?
Truth be told, the actual original vintage story was the real inspiration for mine because I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. I loved it, absolutely loved it, like a lot of other readers did. And it just covered a lot of territory, and I really connected with it.
Yeah.
And then this idea popped into my head about what we could do with the sequel, and then it just kind of went from there. I did a lot of research. The research also inspired me with various plot lines and ideas, and I ended up with about 100 pages of visual research and really detailed research from everything from animals and plants right through to the kind of guns or revolvers that the French police use, and a lot of other stuff as well. And I watched a lot of videos, kind of scene by scene, to kind of break down settings and things like that. So all those things were thrown into a big pot of inspiration and helped me kind of realise the story.
Okay. The last question is question number 3. Talks about how is it being a published writer, and what would you do if you weren't an author?
I've always wanted to be a writer from probably about the age of 5, when I was just reading. I always loved books and I always loved comics from an early age. So it was kind of embedded in me. Having said that, I came from a generation where kids were not encouraged to pursue their creative dreams. So I was sidetracked, like many other people, into careers that I really didn't want to do, but I just kept getting pulled back into this. And I also ended up doing a professional writing degree, and I absolutely love writing stories, and I've got so many I need to and want to write over the next few years, and that's really only what I want to focus on. So the second part of the question that you asked me is, what would I do if I weren't a writer or an author? And there's kind of several prongs to this answer. So one of the things I was drawn to many years ago is, and I actually became a clinical hypnotherapist and PSH therapist for 11 years. So I actually had I was working part-time in that. So 1 foot in publishing and 1 foot in therapy. And I had a practice for 11 years. And then I got this feeling that I needed to just focus on one because both of them were too big.
Yeah.
So if I weren't doing writing stories, I would go back to that, which is about helping people, heal from various problems like anxiety or, various other problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, a whole lot of other things. So I'd probably go to that. But if I was really wealthy and I had unlimited funds, I would set up an animal sanctuary.
Okay.
For unwanted dogs, cats, and other animals as well.
Right.
And just create this beautiful, beautiful place for all these animals that are suffering. That's what I would do.
Rightio. I'm right now, when you're saying that, I'm picturing, because obviously I think when I read stories and I'm reading, I think right now I'm reading the 2022 Phantom Annual, which is issue 1910. And I think sometimes when I do read, say, like an interesting story, say about a historical figure or something like that, sometimes I can actually get ideas of maybe this is where it could lead, or this is where something may happen in a future story to do with the original story. So yeah, it's interesting. And just like you're saying with protecting animals, so when you're saying that, I was picturing, so basically you've got a, you'd say green grass, flowers, ferns, trees, and then you've got all these types of different animals. Say it would be Australian animals, any other type ones that you might be looking to take care of and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I would. The dream would be to have a, a vet practice on this huge retreat, like a big farm, like 1,000, and these runs and pastures for unwanted donkeys and unwanted, sheep or cattle or, and then, runs for dogs, especially older dogs, which are not adopted. And I've always had an affinity for cats since I was 5 years old. So I was always, socializing feral cats and finding stray cats and looking after those as well. So basically looking after the needs of animals. So that's what I would do. And have a big entourage of people I couldn't do it by myself. I would kind of manage it, but everyone else would be in there with the same kind of, thought in mind to bring these animals a beautiful quality of life.
Yeah. Lastly on the show, we have a big new update from the new publisher in Germany. So I think in the last year or so with these new publishers, as I said early on in the show, I think with these new publishers coming and bringing more fans so they can get introduced to the Phantom and new stories as what Julie does. With these two new publishers, one being from Germany and one being from France, we finally have news that up on the screen right now, we finally have news. A new publisher from Germany will be putting out new comics out in April/May. If you enjoyed this week's episode of The Enthusiast, you can follow us on Instagram at Phantom Cave Reviews and on Facebook at Phantom Cave. Now, Julie, if people wanted to ask more questions about this certain story and to do with other things, where could they contact you about?
Probably the best thing to do would be to contact me on my Facebook page, or email me at julie@juliedietrich.com, which is spelt JuliEDitrich.com. I will mention that this story probably won't be out till the end of the year, but I will be posting little bits of artwork once Wendell sends them through. It will be a black and white story, but the inking is just amazing. I've just gobsmacked at how beautiful the work is from Wendell. So I can't wait to share it with everyone.
I think I'm just going to continue on here. I think I was talking to another person, a collector, I think a couple of days ago, which the full interview will come out soon. I think I personally, I love the black and white stories, and I love how the artwork for the stories and new stories that come out with new artists. I think having it in black and white is I've always thought of it, if you have it in black and white, it creates that mood, it creates drama, it creates everything that I would think that the Phantom is meant to be in. Right now, I like some stories in color, some stories are suitable for color, but sometimes black and white just brings it to another level. And I always, when I work on my photos, I have a soft spot for black and white stuff.
I don't blame you, Bradley. I completely agree.
And as always, if you would like to keep Phantom Caving, stay safe. And as always, we will see you in another episode of The Enthusiast.